Settle in and let your body grow heavy with stillness as you drift backward in time. You're about to take a slow, quiet journey through the dim, narrow streets of the medieval world, a place of stone walls, flickering torchlight, and ancient justice. The night air is cool, tinged with the scent of soot and livestock, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls softly from a church tower. It is a world where candlelight was precious, bread was often coarse, and stealing a simple loaf could cost far more than it was worth. Tonight, we will explore what life was truly like for the medieval thief, not the dashing rogue of romantic legend, but the ordinary man or woman who stole out of desperation, greed, or simply poor luck. We'll move slowly, with calm curiosity, through the thieves' alleys and marketplaces, past the manorial courts and public gallows. Along the way, you'll gain a deeper understanding of medieval punishment, justice, prisons, and the many quiet agonies of a world where even minor crimes could invite brutal consequences. But we will not linger too long in fear or pain. Our path will gently curve through stories of common lives, unexpected leniency, and the way societies shaped their thieves as much as punished them. All of this will unfold in 8 unhurried segments, each a stepping stone further into a world both familiar and foreign, where survival was a daily negotiation and theft could become a sentence written into the skin. Now, allow your breathing to settle as we begin, with the streets where thieves were born. Imagine the world of a poor medieval town, perhaps in England during the late 13th century. The sky is often grey, the streets slick with mud, and timber-framed houses crowd together like tired shoulders leaning into one another. The scent in the air is a mix of smoke, wet wool, and the byproducts of daily life, animal and human alike, left to seep into the dirt pathways. The sounds are subdued but ever present. The clatter of wooden carts, the calls of market vendors, the muffled creak of shutters opening to let in what little light filters through. Here, amid the working poor, life is uncertain. A bad harvest, a tax levy, or a sudden illness can turn a family's fortunes overnight. Bread may still bake in the hearth, but the flour was borrowed, and boots, once too large, now pinch the feet of a growing child. You are surrounded by the signs of survival-patched cloaks, repurposed cloth, and fingers that move quickly when coins pass hands. In such a world, the line between honest work and petty theft is as thin as the seam in a worn-out tunic. A missing sausage from a market stall might mean an extra day of warmth for one family and an accusation that could ruin them. Children watch carefully when merchants display wares, not just out of awe but out of calculation. And adults, worn down by labour and hunger, sometimes let their fingers wander. Most theft in the medieval world is not grand or organised. It is a loaf of bread, a chicken from a neighbour's coop, a length of cloth snatched from an unattended stall. Sometimes it's not even taken by stealth, but simply stumbled into, a drunkard falling asleep in someone else's cart, or a starving woman pocketing an apple in full view. These are not crimes of ambition, but of fatigue and futility. It's easy, from the distant present, to imagine these thieves as scoundrels, but you must picture them differently. They are cold, they are tired, they are carrying shame long before they are caught. Often, they don't think of themselves as criminals at all, merely as people trying to make it to the next sunrise. Survival in medieval towns was a shifting game of obligation, barter, and opportunity. Not everyone won. In many villages and boroughs, minor theft is handled locally. A reeve might be called to mediate a dispute over missing cheese or a stolen piglet. Sometimes, compensation is demanded rather than formal punishment. But when tensions rise, or the item is too valuable, or the thief a repeat offender, the matter may go to court. And that is when the true consequences begin. The journey from desperation to punishment is short and rarely kind. There is no professional police force, only watchmen, neighbours, and the occasional bailiff. If someone is caught in the act, they may be tied to a post until morning, or paraded through the streets as a warning. If accused, they may have to swear innocence on holy relics, find others willing to vouch for their character. Yet even these early moments carry weight. Reputation is currency. A whispered suspicion can close doors and mark a man or woman for life. The theft itself might be over in seconds, but its echo lingers, haunting the rhythm of daily existence like the soft toll of that distant bell. Some become known as habitual thieves' chronic offenders by medieval standards. But often these are simply those who were caught more than once. The unlucky, the poor, the powerless. Once a person enters the local record as a thief, their path grows steeper. Landlords become wary. Work becomes scarce. Children are mocked or shunned, and desperation deepens. From this fertile ground poverty, shame, and exclusion grows the identity of the medieval thief. Not a role chosen with pride, but one that sticks, like damp to wool, refusing to let go. Some lean into it, others try to climb out, only to be pulled back by another misstep. The village remembers, even when the deed is forgotten. And so, as the streets quiet at night and torchlight flickers along the alleyways, a figure moves in silence with malice, but with the slow, practiced steps of someone who knows that hunger can make one bold, and punishment is never far behind. From here, we'll follow that figure deeper into the world of medieval justice. For next comes the question of what happened when a thief was caught and how mercy, fear, and law tangled together in the minds of those who judged them. You've taken something, maybe a coin purse left on a bench, or a chicken in the haze of early morning miststand for a moment it seems no one has seen. But then a shout rings out. A hand grabs your shoulder. The world spins into motion. Being caught as a thief in the medieval period wasn't always immediate or theatrical. Sometimes, a thief might be identified days later, after rumours, inquiries, and neighbourly suspicions fermented into certainty. Other times, a person was seized on the spot by townsfolk, constables, or angry victims, and justice, such as it was, began right there in the muddy street. Punishment didn't necessarily wait for the formality of trial. In smaller villages or manors, local lords and reeves could administer justice on the spot. For petty theft, you might be publicly shame-stripped to your undergarments and lashed, or forced to wear a sign that declared your crime. These were not the punishments of a legal system concerned with reform. They were tools of deterrence, shaped to teach others a lesson through your humiliation. You might be placed in the stocks, your ankles locked between wooden beams, or even hung by the wrists in pillories while villagers jeered or threw refuse. These scenes, while now almost quaint in imagination, were cold, painful, and socially ruinous. Worse still was the slow passage of time spent exposed to wind, rain, and the disapproval of your peers. If the crime was more serious, if your past shadowed too darkly over your name, you could be taken to the local jail. These were not the regimented prisons of the modern world. Jails were temporary holding places, often dank, overcrowded, and unsanitary. Some were little more than stone rooms beneath castles or churches. There might be no bedding, no food beyond what family brought, and no clear idea of how long you would remain. Inside, you might be shackled or left in the company of murderers, debtors, and other accused, because guilt had not yet been decided. In many cases, the condition of the jail itself served as punishment enough. Rats, filth, and hunger bore down as heavily as iron chains. You waited for a trial that could be days or months away, your fate suspended like a candle left burning in a drafty hall. Then came the court. If your case was serious enough to warrant it, you might appear before a manorial court, or for graver crimes, before a royal judge at a larger assize. In either setting, the process was not swift. Witnesses might be few, and evidence often relied on word of mouth. Sometimes, guilt was assumed simply because your reputation had frayed too far to repair. You might be asked to swear an oath of innocence before God and man. In earlier centuries, this could even involve ordeal plunging a hand into boiling water, for example, to retrieve a stone, with the wound examined days later for signs of divine judgment. Such methods faded over time, replaced by more formal procedures, but their memory lingered like a chill. A more common method was compurgation, where a defendant brought forth several people known as oath helpers to swear on their behalf. These individuals didn't have to prove your innocence, only your character. If no one stepped forward, silence could be louder than any accusation. And still, the thief might plead benefit of clergy, a medieval loophole of sorts, where literate men could claim sanctuary from secular justice by reading a passage of scripture. Over time, even illiterate offenders found ways to fake it, having memorized the neck verse used most often. But such options were rarely open to the truly poor. When the sentence came, it could be severe. For repeat offences or higher value theft, execution was not uncommon. Hanging was the most frequent method, and it was often public. The condemned might be dragged through the town to the gallows, the spectacle designed to imprint a lasting lesson on those who watched. Yet executions were not as routine as myths suggest. Medieval societies were pragmatic. A dead thief could not work, could not pay fines, could not be reformed. Often, lighter punishments were given: branding, mutilation, or banishment. A thief might lose an ear, or be branded on the hand, permanently marked as untrustworthy. These marks followed them through life, reminders worn into the flesh that no cloak could hide. There was also the possibility of mercy. A compassionate lord might reduce a sentence, or a jury of local men knowing the accused as neighbour, cousin, or friend might sway the outcome. In such cases, justice became a matter of circumstance, personality, and favour, rather than written law. Throughout all of this, one truth held firm. Being caught was not just a moment. It was a process that could unravel your life, thread by thread. From the jeering of your neighbours to the silence of former friends, from the echoing chill of a jail cell to the heavy hush of a courtroom, punishment seeped through every part of your existence. And yet, there were those who endured it. Alan returned, scarred, diminished, but alive. In the next segment, we will follow those individuals, those repeat offenders and outlaws who came to inhabit a different place within society, feared, hunted, and sometimes romanticized. We'll explore the rise of the professional thief and the outlaws who slipped beyond the law's grasp entirely. Now imagine the thief who has been caught once, perhaps twice. The punishment has already left its mark on the body, on reputation, and on opportunity. No one wants to hire a branded man. No one lets their cart stand idle near the one who once snatched a purse. The stain lingers, and eventually it becomes too heavy to wash off. That is when the thief may stop trying to rejoin society at all. Instead, they slip into a different life entirely. In the medieval world, to be an outlaw was not merely to be a criminal. It was to be outside the law. A person no longer afforded legal protection. Once declared an outlaw by a court, typically for failing to appear or refusing to submit to justice, a man or woman was essentially erased from lawful society. Anyone could harm them, even kill them, without legal consequence. They could not own land, bring suit, or be sheltered by others without those people risking punishment themselves. But though the law cast them out, it did not erase their bodies from the landscape. Outlaws continued to live on the fringes of society, in forests, moors, or remote hills. They travelled at dusk and in shadow, moving between hamlets, relying on stolen goods, occasional shelter from sympathetic folk, or bartered services offered under false names. They formed loose communities at times, clusters of the desperate and the shunned, surviving by theft, cunning, and sheer resilience. It is in this space that legend begins to take shape. Names like Robin Hood rise from the mire of record, and myth figures said to steal from the rich and give to the poor. But for every romantic tale of greenwood justice, there were countless nameless outlaws who lived not with honour, but in hardship. Their world was a cold one, made up of makeshift shelters, hastily snatched meals, and nights passed listening for the tramp of pursuing feet. Yet these repeat offenders sometimes gained a strange sort of status. Not honor exactly, but notoriety. Villagers might whisper of them, exaggerate their crimes, or secretly admire their defiance. In rare cases, chronic thieves became figures of fear and fascination. Their names passed from mouth to mouth like old songs. One might hear of a certain Thornhand in the north who stole horses from under a sheriff's nose, or a woman called Mistress Rill, who tricked toll collectors for years. Records occasionally mention gangs-organized bands of thieves who moved through counties, striking with surprising coordination. These groups were not vast or militarized, but they could unsettle the peace. Highwaymen, housebreakers, and poachers all played roles in these subterranean networks of crime. Some stole for survival. Others, perhaps embittered or hardened by punishment, stole out of vengeance or thrill. The authorities, of course, did not ignore them. Sheriffs, constables, and bounty hunters pursued known criminals when possible. Occasionally, lords would raise special forces or offer pardons to those who brought outlaws to justice. But it was not always easy to catch someone who had learned to live beyond the edges of mapped roads and recorded names. Interestingly, some outlaws were offered formal pardon in exchange for military service. This was especially true during times of war. A kingdom short on soldiers might forgive the crimes of able-bodied men if they agreed to fight on behalf of the crown. Thus, the line between criminal and soldier blurred today a hunted thief, tomorrow a footman in the king's army. Life beyond the law was, above all, uncertain. Even thieves who survived for years might fall to a trap, a betrayal, or simple misfortune. A broken ankle, a harsh winter, or the loyalty of a friend turned informant could unravel it all. There were no guarantees in the greenwood only. More hunger, more hiding, and a life always glancing over the shoulder. Yet some chose it, even after punishment, even after opportunities to return. Why? Perhaps because the ordinary life offered no welcome. Once marked, a thief might never fully re-enter the community they left behind. Perhaps the forest, the road, and the dark became more familiar than the village square. And still, these stories are rarely told in full. The chronic thief leaves little trace, perhaps a note in a court roll, or a fragment in a ballad. The records list names, but not voices. What remains is the outline of a life walked at the margins, shaped by the sharp edge of law and the dull grind of need. Next, we will leave the outlaw's shadowy path and re-enter the bustling heart of medieval justice. For while thieves roamed in the forests and alleys, society constructed complex systems to handle them. We'll explore the courts, the punishments, and the evolving structure of medieval law, from manorial tribunals to royal justice, and how even in a world of hardship, order was patiently, sometimes cruelly, maintained. Step now into a quieter place, not the muddy alleys of the village, but the solemn hush of a medieval courtroom. It might be no more than a timber hall on a lord's estate, or a stone chamber in a town's guild house. Its floors swept but uneven, the air scented faintly of old wax and damp parchment. At the centre of this space sits the manorial lord or royal judge, robed not in modern black but in the fabrics of his rank, with attendants at either side, clerks with quills poised, and perhaps a priest murmuring nearby. Here, a thief does not sneak through shadows, but stands still, awaiting judgment. The medieval legal system, though sometimes called primitive, was layered, deliberate, and at times surprisingly nuanced. It was not one uniform structure, but a complex patchwork of overlapping jurisdictions, royal courts, ecclesiastical courts, borough courts, and manorial courts, each responsible for different kinds of cases, and each with its own customs and procedures. The fate of a thief depended not only on the crime, but on where and by whom it was judged. In the countryside, most minor cases fell to the manorial court, which met several times a year. These sessions, often called court baron or court leet, handled local disputes, breaches of custom, and small crimes. Attendance was expected from tenants, and even accusations of theft would be dealt with by neighbours jurors drawn from among the local population, who often knew both the accused and the victim. Justice here could be quick, but was rarely impartial. Social standing, family ties, and local reputation often shaped the outcome more than the facts of the case. Punishments for lesser thefts might include fines, public humiliation, or short-term imprisonment. The idea was not only to penalize, but to reassert order. A community, after all, could not function if its own members turned upon each other in secret. And so, the court record might show a baker fined for stealing flour, a servant dismissed for lifting a spoon, a young boy reprimanded for taking turnips from a neighbour's plot. These cases remind us that theft, like hunger, was ever present, and so was the system to manage it. More serious crimes, however, were escalated to royal justice. The king's courts travelled in circuits known as assizes and brought with them a sense of ceremony and dread. When the justices arrived, towns were alerted in advance. Accused criminals were brought from the jail, and the public often gathered to witness proceedings. These sessions were grander, more formal, and the punishments meted out here could be severe: branding, mutilation, banishment, and execution. The process itself was unlike what we might expect today. There were no defense attorneys. The accused often represented themselves, responding to charges read aloud, perhaps in Latin or law, French languages few commoners understood. Evidence, when offered, was minimal. A stolen object, a witness statement, or even the prior reputation of the accused could suffice. Trial by jury existed, but jurors were not always neutral. They were often local men expected to know the character of the accused and act accordingly. One of the curious features of medieval justice was the emphasis on confession. A guilty plea could sometimes earn mercy, while a refusal to plead at all could result in harsher outcomes. In extreme cases, refusal to enter a plea could lead to the brutal practice of peine forte, et dure pressing the accused under heavy stones until they either spoke or perished. Though rare, such methods reveal how deeply the system prized closure and order over individual rights. Yet not all courts were secular. The Church maintained its own parallel legal system, and ecclesiastical courts offered a markedly different experience, especially for those who could claim benefit of clergy. In theory, this privilege allowed members of the clergy to be tried by church rather than crown. In practice, it extended protection to anyone who could read a verse of scripture, often Psalm 51, the so-called neck verse, because it could save one's neck from the gallows. Ecclesiastical courts favoured penance over punishment. A thief might be sentenced to public prayer, pilgrimage, or temporary exile from the community. While not necessarily lenient, pilgrimage could be long and dangerous, it reflected a fundamentally different view of justice, one that aimed to heal the soul rather than exact revenge on the body. Over time, however, the secular courts grew more standardized. By the late Middle Ages, records were kept with greater precision, and justices were more professionalized. Thieves' fates became tied not just to the mood of their neighbours, but to evolving statutes and royal edicts. Laws such as the Statute of Winchester or the Ordinance of Labourers shaped how theft was punished, especially in times of scarcity or plague, when stealing bread or a tool could be seen as a threat to social stability. Still, for all their stern formality, these courts were embedded in a world of personal relationships and practical considerations. Judges might offer pardons if the accused had served in war. Communities might look the other way if the thief was well liked. And lords sometimes intervened on behalf of valuable tenants. Justice, in the end, was not blind, but it did strive, in its own uneven way, to keep society from fraying. As you leave the court chamber behind, the next chapter in our journey opens not in cells or forests, but in the places of confinement themselves. For while modern prisons are built to contain, medieval jails served very different roles. In our next segment, we will quietly step into the world of imprisonment, where confinement was not always a punishment, but often a pause between judgment and fate. Now imagine yourself behind a heavy wooden door, thick with iron bands and bolted shut. Light barely filters through a small grated opening high above. The air is still, and the stone beneath your feet is cool and uneven. This is not a place designed for punishment exactly, nor is it meant for reflection or rehabilitation. It is a holding place, temporary, uncertain, and often as bleak as the crimes that led people here. This is the medieval jail. In the medieval world, prisons were not the institutions of correction and discipline we know today. They were not long-term destinations, but interim spaces where the accused waited for judgment, the condemned awaited execution, and the indebted hoped for someone, somehow, to settle their dues. For thieves, it was often a place between the act and its consequence. You did not serve time in the jail. You simply stayed until your fate was decided, sometimes forgotten. Most jails were basic and crude. They might be part of a castle, a basement of a town hall, or a standalone structure near the market square. Some were repurposed towers or crumbling keeps, adapted less for comfort than containment. The floors were often damp, straw was scattered more as an afterthought than bedding, and the air could carry the mix of mildew, smoke, and unwashed bodies. Inmates were rarely kept in solitude. Cells were communal, and a petty thief might find himself sleeping beside a murderer, a debt-ridden merchant, or a falsely accused traveller. There was little separation by crime, and even less in terms of cleanliness. Disease spread easily. Lice were a given. Rats were common. Food, when it came, often arrived not from the jailer, but from family or the charity of local parishes. You had to pay for almost everything. The jailer might charge for better straw, extra food, or permission to have visitors. Bribes were common not just for comfort, but for safety. A prisoner with nothing might suffer quietly in the corner, while another, with connections or coin, might secure a small stool or a place closer to the single window. Corruption, while frowned upon, was deeply embedded in the structure. The jail was a place of waiting, but also of bargaining. And yet, within these grim walls, a strange sort of society emerged. Long-term inmates created hierarchies, where newcomers learned quickly whom to avoid, whom to trust, and how to navigate the grim routine of days blurred together. Time passed slowly. The sounds outside, bells, footsteps, market cries were reminders that life continued beyond the walls, indifferent and distant. In some places, jails were managed by sheriffs or constables who held authority over local law. Elsewhere, the church maintained separate prisons for those accused under ecclesiastical law, though these were often only marginally better. Religious prisoners might be kept in monastic buildings, perhaps under lighter supervision, but confinement was still deeply uncomfortable. Silence, fasting, and solitude were methods of penitence, not luxury. Interestingly, imprisonment itself was rarely the punishment for theft. It was merely the threshold. A thief accused of a crime might be held for days or weeks, but the outcome would lead elsewhere to a fine, a branding, or, in many cases, the gallows. Long-term incarceration was expensive, impractical, and reserved only for the unusual. Space was limited. Prisons were not meant to contain society's ills, but to expel them through public justice. Still, for some, the wait was endless. Those accused but never tried might linger in jail for months. Records reveal individuals who spent years awaiting attention from the court. Forgotten by the system, they survived through gifts, through barter, or through sheer endurance. Some were released quietly when their cases were dropped. Others died in confinement, their names barely recorded. For women, imprisonment carried particular dangers. Female thieves were often placed in the same cells as men or kept in poorly supervised corners. Harassment and assault were not uncommon. Some cities developed separate jail facilities or designated certain nuns as guardians for imprisoned women, but such protections were not universal. A woman might be jailed not just for theft, but for refusing to obey her husband, or for engaging in behavior deemed scandalous. The line between moral offence and legal crime was often thin. Yet, not all experiences were entirely grim. In certain towns, prisoners were allowed out during the day under supervision, especially for minor offences. Some worked as labourers, or helped maintain the very buildings they were confined within. Others performed small services mending clothes, sharpening tools for the townspeople, earning a few coins or bits of food. In rare instances, communities developed a kind of relationship with long-term prisoners, seeing them not just as criminals, but as part of the town's strange, necessary machinery. For those with means, there were better options still. A thief from a wealthy family might secure bail, pay a fine, or escape altogether through connections. Some bought their way into house arrest or temporary exile, sparing themselves the indignity of the jail. Justice was intended to be blind, but in practice, it blinked often. As you return now from behind the stone walls, imagine the thief who has survived this passage, who has faced confinement, judgment, and release. What life remains? What choices? In our next segment, we'll explore how society treated former thieves, those who lived, who walked free again, but with a mark upon them that never truly faded. We'll see what it meant to be a forgiven criminal, and whether forgiveness truly meant freedom. You step out of the jail. The door creaks shut behind you, but the weight it held doesn't vanish, it simply follows you, resting across your shoulders like a cloak you cannot shed. You are free now, in the sense that no bars confine you, no guards watch your sleep, but your name has changed in the minds of others. You are a thief. In the medieval world, the aftermath of punishment did not restore one to society with ease. There were no formal systems of reintegration, no officials to help you find work or shelter. Once judged and released, you were left to find your way through a world that now regarded you with suspicion, or worse, with contempt. The sentence had been served, but the consequences had only begun. For some, the punishment had left a visible scar. Branding, often with a hot iron marked on the hand or cheek, was a common sentence for repeat offenders. It ensured that the crime followed you into every transaction, every meeting, every glance. A branded man could not hide in anonymity. He bore his record on his skin, as permanent and public as any criminal register. In some towns, even those merely accused but acquitted were remembered. Reputation, once soiled, was not easily cleansed. Returning to a village or borough after punishment meant confronting a changed dynamic. Employers, already wary in a fragile economy, were unlikely to hire a known thief. Craftsmen might refuse to take on a tainted apprentice. Market sellers could turn away when you approached. Even those who pitied you might offer nothing more than a bit of bread or a kind word, quickly withdrawn. Family ties, too, were tested. Some relatives severed connections entirely, afraid of being tarred by association. Others took you in quietly, hoping time would dull the memory of your offence. For those with children, the stigma often bled across generations. A father's theft could become a son's shame. A mother's crime might echo through whispered gossip long after she had mended her ways. Yet survival demanded persistence. Many former thieves returned to the rhythms of labour, often under new names or in distant towns. It was not uncommon for a man or woman to travel miles on foot to find work where their past was unknown. Some joined caravans or merchant trains, offering manual labour or protection in exchange for coin and passage. Others entered the service of monasteries, not always out of piety, but because the church sometimes offered shelter where the world did not. A few found solace in pilgrimage. To journey to a holy site, Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, Rome was not only a religious act, but a socially acceptable reason to leave one's home and wander. Along the road, fellow pilgrims might ask fewer questions. The long walk offered time to reflect, to pray, to forget, and in towns along the way, temporary labour could be found, fetching water, mending fences, watching livestock. Even in cities, where the press of bodies made hiding easier, the past lingered. Urban life offered anonymity, but also chaos. A thief turned baker's assistant might live unnoticed for years, only to be exposed by a single familiar face or careless word. Guilds, though powerful, did not welcome those with stained reputations. Membership was a privilege earned through trust, and trust, once lost, was rarely returned. Interestingly, the law itself sometimes offered pathways for redemption, at least in theory. In certain periods, those who aided in the capture of other criminals could be granted leniency. A former thief might work with constables or local officials, exchanging information in return for protection. But this was dangerous work, often viewed as betrayal by former associates, and rarely leading to full acceptance among the lawful. Some former criminals leaned into a new kind of identity, not reformed, but transformed. A man known for theft might become a storyteller, spinning his past into cautionary tales. A woman once branded could become a healer or wise woman on the outskirts of town, feared but also sought after. These roles did not erase their crimes, but they reshaped their place in the community, still marginal, but less despised. And always, there was the church. For those truly penitenter, simply desperate, the cloister offered refuge. Monasteries and nunneries, while selective, occasionally accepted those with troubled pasts, particularly if they brought labour or skills. The cloister walls, thick and still, held many who sought to leave the world's judgment behind. But the road back to trust was long, and few walked it to its end. Most simply endured. They lived quietly, kept their heads low, avoided disputes. They learned to read expressions, to sense when a conversation turned cold. Over time, some found peace, others did not. Still, the resilience of these individuals was remarkable. They navigated a world shaped to punish, yet they persisted. They found ways to eat, to sleep, to pray, to love. Some even laughed again. Their stories rarely appear in chronicles or court rolls. They were too ordinary, too quiet, but they were real, and they remind us that even in the harshest eras, people found ways to move forward. As the years wore on, the nature of theft itself began to change. Economic shifts, population growth, and political upheaval reshaped what was considered crime and who committed it. In our next segment, we'll examine these broader shifts in society and how the treatment of thieves evolved in response. From urban pickpockets to noble embezzlers, theft was never static, and neither was justice. As the centuries turned and towns grew busier, the world of the medieval thief slowly changed. No longer confined to muddy villages and isolated manors, crime now echoed in cobbled streets beneath towering cathedrals, inside bustling markets filled with foreign spices and local suspicion. Society itself was changing, and with it, so too did the nature of theft and the way it was understood. In early medieval life, theft was often simple and personal. A chicken taken from a coop, a loaf of bread slipped into a satchel. These were acts committed out of necessity or opportunity, visible and immediate. But with the rise of towns, trade, and money economies, crime took on new shapes. Coins replaced barter. Locks became common. Property became something not just seen and touched, but counted and tracked. And with money came new temptations. Marketplaces thrummed with goods, their owners distracted by customers, and soon the pickpocket emerged. Small, nimble, and often young, these thieves moved in crowds, vanishing before their victims realized what had happened. Unlike the clumsy, desperate thefts of rural life, this was a skiller practice honed in cities, passed down in whispered instruction, and sometimes shared among groups that lived entirely by such trade. Urban theft was not only about speed, but strategy. Some worked in pairs, with one creating a distraction, while the other took a purse. Others operated in known areas at town gates, in churchyards during festivals, near taverns where drink dulled vigilance. For a while, such thefts were difficult to prove. A cry of "thief" might draw a crowd, but unless the item was found in the thief's possession, accusations fell to rumor. In time, laws changed to address these crimes more harshly. reflecting society's growing concern not just with survival, but with order and control. This period also saw the rise of more organized theft. In cities like London, Paris, and Florence, records speak of gang-sleuth confederations of criminals who shared tools, bases, and even profits. Some specialized in breaking into shops, others in raiding shipments before they reached market. A few had connections to corrupt officials who turned a blind eye in exchange for coin or silence. The thief was no longer only a peasant snatching a loaf. He might now wear fine clothes, carry a blade, and know exactly when the city guard changed shift. As crime evolved, so too did the machinery of justice. Urban centres developed more structured policing systems. Watchmen patrolled at night, carrying lanterns and staves. Some towns built holding cells directly into their market squares or guild halls. Thieves caught in the act might be held briefly before being brought before a city magistrate. Trials became more frequent, and in many places, the written record grew more detailed case names, charges, verdicts, giving historians today a clearer window into these changing times. Meanwhile, the types of theft multiplied. No longer was crime limited to physical items. Fraud began to appear more regularly in court records. A merchant who watered down his wine, a baker who shaved weight off his loaves, a miller who took more than his due when grinding a neighbour's grain. These were thefts by deception, not stealth but thefts nonetheless, and often more profitable than mere pickpocketing. Even those of high status were not immune to such temptation. Noblemen embezzled taxes, monks skimmed donations. In royal courts, some servants siphoned off goods meant for the king's table. These crimes were harder to prosecute. Status offered protection, and often the punishment for a rich thief was far gentler than for a poor one. A baron might pay a fine, a peasant might hang. Public attitudes toward theft also shifted. In earlier centuries, many viewed it as a breach of Pisa, personal insult or violation. But over time, as property rights solidified and economies became more formalized, theft came to be seen as a threat to order itself. The fear was not only that something might be stolen, but that the very fabric of society might unravel if thieves went unchecked. The language of the law grew more severe. Felony became a broader category, encompassing more forms of theft. The punishments became standardized, and in some regions, judges were encouraged, even mandated to show little mercy to repeat offenders. Gallows were built in public squares. Stocks and pillories became symbols of shame. The message was clear. Theft, however small, would not be tolerated. Yet, amid this tightening grip of law, acts of compassion endured. Juries still sometimes acquitted out of sympathy. Clergy intervened on behalf of the poor, and common people, recognizing their own fragility, might shelter a thief or look the other way. The line between criminal and victim remained blurred. For many, theft was not rebellion, it was response. To hunger, to loss, to a world that offered little margin for error. As we near the end of our journey, we must turn our gaze to the punishments themselves, not the laws or the trials, but the methods by which justice was carried out. From gallows to branding irons, from shameful parades to quiet exiles, the medieval world used the body as a canvas upon which judgment was written. In our next and final segment, before the conclusion, we'll look closely and gently at these methods, not to shock, but to understand. For only in knowing the past can we appreciate the long path history has taken toward more measured forms of justice. As you move closer to the heart of medieval justice, you begin to notice something striking. The body itself becomes the message. It is the parchment upon which the law inscribes its warnings. For the thief, punishment was rarely quiet or hidden. It was meant to be seen, remembered, and feared not just by the guilty, but by everyone else. Punishment in the medieval world was not solely about deterrence or control. It was also deeply symbolic. Each sentence told a story not just of what the criminal had done, but of what the community feared, what it valued, and what it demanded in return. And so, for theft, a crime against both property and trust, punishments were designed to be as visible as the offence was stealthy. Let us begin with the simplest form, the fine. For small thefts, an apple, a loaf of bread, a few stolen nails, the accused might be ordered to pay a sum to the victim or the local lord. This worked well if the thief had money, which was often not the case. For the poor, fines could be exchanged for a time in the stocks or another public punishment. The message remained: theft cost you something, even if not coin. The stocks and pillory were among the most common responses to petty theft. Picture them now: wooden frames, often set up in town squares or near churchyards. The stocks clamped around the ankles, the pillory around the neck and wrists. Thieves placed in these were left exposed for hours, sometimes a full day, while passers-by threw waste or insults, or simply stared in silence. There was pain, of course, from the awkward positioning and the elements, but the greater wound came from the eyes of neighbours' recognition, disappointment, amusement, or even hatred. Branding came next in severity, often used for repeat offenders or those caught stealing valuable items. It marked a person permanently. A hot iron would be pressed to the hand, the cheek, or the forehead, leaving a scar in the shape of a letter, often a T for thief. The pain was brief, but the consequences were lasting. Branded individuals found it nearly impossible to work, to marry, or to move freely without being recognized. They were labeled not only by law but by flesh. Then came mutilation. In some regions, particularly in earlier medieval centuries, thieves might lose an ear, a hand, or part of a finger. The justification was both practical and symbolic. A thief had used their body to violate another's rights, no, their body bore the cost. This method, though increasingly rare by the later Middle Ages, remained a powerful deterrent in certain regions and legal codes. Its spectacle reinforced the social contract. Take from others, and you lose a part of yourself. Whipping, too, was a regular punishment, especially in ecclesiastical courts, which preferred penance to death. A thief might be stripped to the waist and lashed in public, the number of strokes determined by the court. While brutal, whipping was sometimes seen as merciful, it punished without ending a life or marking it permanently. Still, the pain and humiliation left their own lingering shadows. Banishment was another tool in the legal arsenal. A thief might be sentenced to leave their village, town, or even the entire shire for a fixed period or forever. This was both punishment and protection. The community rid itself of a known offender, and the offender was given a chance to start over elsewhere, though without support, without shelter, and with the risk of death if found where they no longer belonged. But for serious thefts, particularly those involving breaking and entering, armed robbery, or repeated offences, death was a common sentence. Hanging was the method of choice, and the gallows stood as grim reminders at the edges of many towns, often on hills or crossroads where travellers could not miss them. Executions were public affairs, attended by crowds that gathered not only out of curiosity, but out of shared participation in the act of justice. The condemned might be led through the streets, accompanied by clergy, perhaps offered a final prayer or confession. In some regions, they were allowed to speak to the crowd, moments where personal remorse or defiance echoed over the hushed assembly. The hanging itself was quick but rarely clean. Death came by strangulation, not by the sharp drop of later centuries. It was a slow fading, a physical unmaking of a person in front of their peers. Still, not every thief hanged died that day. Sometimes the rope broke, sometimes the crowd intervened. In a few cases, those who survived an execution attempt were spared, believed to have been saved by divine will. These rare events became stories, retold in taverns and marketplaces, testaments to the idea that even justice might yield before fate. And yet, for all their harshness, these punishments were not static. As society changed, as laws formalized, as kings and councils centralized authority, some methods faded, others became more restrained. The rise of written legal codes, of royal courts, and of more sophisticated bureaucracies gradually shifted the focus from spectacle to process. By the end of the medieval era, theft was still punished, but often with greater consistency, and sometimes with an eye toward rehabilitation. Through it all, one truth remained. To steal in the medieval world was to gamble not just your livelihood, but your standing, your body, and sometimes your life. And the punishment, whether it left a scar, a limp, or a silence where your voice once waistcoated far beyond the act itself. Now, as we prepare to leave this long and shadowed journey behind, our final step is one of reflection. In our closing, we will gently consider what these stories tell us not only about the medieval thief, but about ourselves, about fear and justice, and the eternal dance between survival and morality.